You're listening to She's the Business podcast. Most business owners focus on their visual parts of their brand to create connection with their audience. However, did you know that the most powerful tool you have at your disposal for creating connection with your audience is actually your voice? So in today's episode, we're going to dive into why your voice is the thing that can bring you bigger audiences. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Osborne, and in my 23 years of business and marketing, I've built many brands to become multi-billion-dollar companies. And just in the last 10 years, I've built 2 online businesses of my own from my dining room table with 2 little babies running around at my feet. I've made it my mission to inspire you to get out of your own way and become the successful business owner who's living the lifestyle you really desire without all the hustle. This is She's the Business podcast, made by women for women. This is your weekly dose of motivation and inspiration. Why is your voice so important as a business owner or as a personal brand to work on your voice and to understand how to use it as a tool? Well, it's because with your voice, you can create a much, much deeper connection with your audience than you can with simply the written word alone. And with obviously your brand visuals, which are always great. But today we're here to talk all about your voice. And I'm bringing you an interview with Katherine Beck, who is an actor. She's a voice coach and voice artist with over 20 years experience in the industry. She really knows her stuff when it comes to using your voice and has been coaching actors and entrepreneurs on how to use their voice for years. I had the pleasure of being part of the inaugural group in her brand new Voice of Authority program, which is for business owners, where she taught us about the techniques to use your voice to create a deeper impact and be able to reach a global audience with simply the power of your voice, which obviously is amazing if you're doing podcasting, but this is also relevant if you are doing any sort of social media live, if you're speaking on stage in front of people, if you're hosting a workshop, an event, anything where you're using your voice for your business. This is absolutely relevant for you. And today, Katherine is going to share with us what it is about voice. And it's a really great episode. She even does a small exercise with me where we try out something live that we hadn't pre-planned. So have a listen and learn something today. Take away something about what you can do with your voice so that you can have a bigger impact in your business. And without further ado, let me play this interview for you. So hi, I'm here with Katherine Beck, and we are about to talk all about how you can use your voice, I think, to connect to your global audience. And Katherine has a load of experience in this area because she is an actor and a voice artist, a voice coach now, but I'll get her to introduce herself and tell us a bit about what you do and who you serve. Katherine, hi.
Hello. Yes, I'm Katherine Beck, and I am an actor turned voice coach. My story is very interesting. So I started acting as a kid and very quickly learned about voiceover in my teens to early 20s. And I thought, gosh, that's so cool how you could act, but with your voice and create characters and get paid for it. I am in. So it started to become a passion for me. I really loved accents and I loved the idea of becoming other characters. And so when I actually left Hollywood, I was living in Hollywood doing the whole acting thing and moved halfway around the world to Sydney, Australia. I thought, well, how am I still going to have my career as an actor, as a voiceover artist, all the way over here? I've got to learn the Australian accent. And it was in that process of learning how to be believable as an Australian so I could book roles over here in Australia that I really understood so much more about human behavior and the perspectives that we have based on where we grew up and who we are speaks volumes as to how we communicate with other people. And that got me started on my journey to really investigate and learn more about voice and communication, and brought that into my coaching. My methodology is really about empowering people to discover their true voice and share it with the world and really connect on a personal level, because I think that's what we're really craving, especially these days, is that personal connection in such a disconnected world.
That's so true. And I think that in our space, now that we are doing business online so much, I think everybody listening probably is agreeing with me when I say it's hard to suddenly go on video, on camera, and speak to an audience. Back in the old days, I think there would be a few people who would get up on stage and do speaking gigs, but most business people probably never did that, right? But these days, almost every business, it's like to get out there and connect with people because we're online, and your audience, your prospective buyers potentially are global. You've got to do that through the internet. And what I think most people do, and I'll put my hand up and say me as well, is when we start out, we're worried so much about the camera. We're worried about how we look and what we're doing, and we're not so concerned about our voice. We might be worried about what to say, but not how we're saying it. And that's why I'm so interested to have this chat with you today, because having worked with you in your Voice of Authority program and really learning about so much about voice, I think there's a whole layer there that we can bring to entrepreneurs and people in this space around the world, that we can start to learn how to use that voice, and what are the things that make a really great delivery in the voice that can really make the words punch. Because yes, having the words there are fantastic, but we all have sat through I think a video or a live where somebody might have felt very robotic, like they're reading off a script, and it's hard to make a connection. It's hard to feel like that person's talking to you when they're very what's the word? Like they're very formal, reserved, and not feeling like it's not flowing. And I'm stumbling over my words right now. I tend to be the person that doesn't use a script, but that's me. I prefer to let the words come into my brain and come out of my mouth, and not have them all written down beforehand. But I think that there's so much to learn about how we actually use a voice and how we can create a better delivery, a better connection, regardless of whether we've got a script in front of us or we're doing it off the cuff. And that's why I'm very excited to have you with me today. So, I guess we're starting off with that 20,000 foot view. What does it mean when you say, we've got a global community and we've got to connect with them, and so much about how we talk is our culture comes into it. Obviously, you and I have totally different accents. We're talking here together, but how do you create that connection with an audience that's potentially all around the world and in different places, different cultures, and we'd have different mannerisms, different ways of speaking?
Yeah, it's an amazing question to ask. And I think I sort of fell into this because I moved countries. I was born, grew up in the US, and I found myself at 27 years old moving to Sydney, Australia, and bright-eyed, excited to make new friends and to lay my foundation in a new country. And I realized the more I put myself out there, my genuine true self, true voice, the more I seemed to repel people from being my friend. And I found that so interesting. I thought, gosh, I'm doing all the things I used to do and say in the US, never had a problem making friends. What's happened now that I've moved to another country? And I realized that people communicate differently. It's not good or bad. It's just different. And the more you can start to understand who your audience is and how they communicate, the easier it is to actually open up and have that dialogues start to happen. Instead of repelling people away, you start to draw them in. So I started to really observe, okay, well, this is my new environment. How do they speak? How do they communicate? And how is that different to how I speak? What could I be doing that might be repelling them? And I started to notice things. And it was a real big discovery for me because I went the exact opposite and I tried to sound as Australian as I possibly could and be as Australian as I possibly could. And even that didn't sit well with me because I wasn't my authentic true self. So it was a real road of discovery over the course of a year to find my voice in a different culture. And when I did that, I realized really owning who you are is so important when you're speaking to a global audience. But at the second that you speak to a global audience, it becomes less about you and it becomes more about them. So the more you can start to look to them when you're communicating, sending it over to them, understanding their point of view, their thoughts, their feelings, their insecurities, leading to whatever their ultimate transformation is, the result that they desire, the more you can lean into that and make it less about you, the easier it becomes to speak to a global audience.
Yes. I think I totally relate to that because as soon as I'm inside my head and worrying about how I'm sounding, or, the same thing happens when you look at the camera, you might be looking at yourself and thinking about how you're looking while you're talking. When you're doing all of that, your brain is focusing on you and not focusing on who it is that you're delivering to. And I loved an exercise that you did with us once where we were imagining a tightrope connected to our foreheads and going into the camera to the other person, and how we were really sending those words down the tightrope. And, that just created, such an easy way to think about, we've actually got to get out of our heads and just focus on the words. And I know that when I get really passionate about something and I get animated and I've got all that energy, people are interested. They want to hang on to every word. They want to listen. They're much more tuned in because I'm tuned into them. I'm tuned into what I'm saying, and I'm not saying it for me, like I'm saying it for someone else. And I really want to get that point across. So when we're too worried about what it is that we're saying or how we're, focusing on that, then I think we lose that connection, which is the conundrum, isn't it? Because what we're talking about today is becoming a little bit aware of how you're delivering it and maybe getting used to some practices that will help us deliver our voice more effectively, but then to stop thinking about it and just let it come naturally so that you can really think about what you're saying to the other person, like how that person's connecting with your words and what it means to them.
Absolutely. For me, it's all about awareness. And it is sort of two phases, that allowing yourself in the learning phase to be analytical, to think about the process, to observe and notice what's happening, using your senses so that when you go in front of a camera or in front of a microphone or having a conversation with someone, then you can put it to them and allow them to draw out the words based on their needs. But that comes in stages. If you don't do that first phase and allow that to become the new normal, let's say, and it's hard to get to that next phase. You can't just dive in and say, okay, I'm going to let the other person take care of it. It's not that easy. Most of us go, well, how do I stop getting in my head? And so it really is a process of releasing that so that you can connect to your audience in a very truthful and genuine way.
Yeah. What are some of the mistakes that you see people making when they've got, we've got everybody's getting on camera, no one's had any training, well, most of us, 99% probably have had no training in speaking to an audience or using our voice or acting. So what are the common things that you see people doing, the mistakes that are preventing them from having a good delivery? What would you say?
Oh, gosh. You're so right. Here's the thing is, so many of us are now thrown into a medium, whether it's visual or audio podcasts, YouTube, lives, webinars, of putting ourselves out there in a way that I've had almost 30 years of experience performing on stage, on screen, voiceover, improvisation. For me, it's no big deal to pick up a script. For example, yesterday I had a voiceover session. I receive the piece of paper with the words on the page just a couple of minutes before they put me in front of the microphone. And our job as a voice actor is to make those words come to life and to connect with whoever's listening to it on that first read. So I feel for you. This is not easy work. I've had almost 30 years to do this, to get to that point, to jump in. And I think people take it for granted that they can just show up in front of a computer screen or a video camera or a microphone and be able to attract people through their voice, through the visual. It does require a little bit of setup. And I think that's probably the biggest misconception, is people think they can just jump in front of a camera and do a live, and people are going to be excited to listen to them, or they're going to gain thousands and thousands of followers. I think that we really do need to slow down to get to that next step, to build your awareness, to gain that attraction. And it becomes really getting in tune with your senses, getting in tune with your mind, your body, your voice, your breath, and that imaginary connection between you and the other person. So the more that you can start to, in acting, we call it the fourth wall. Have you ever heard of that? The fourth wall? No. So on stage, when you're on stage and you're watching a bunch of actors and they're talking to each other, there's an imaginary fourth wall there. We can't see, but it's separating us for the audience. And when you see an actor turn to the audience and actually speak to the audience, that's breaking the fourth wall. And so as entrepreneurs that are, using video and podcasts and all these things to talk to people, you're breaking the fourth wall. But the problem is that you're not actually breaking that fourth wall. You still left this imaginary barrier, this imaginary wall there to allow your audience to really connect to you, and for you to allow yourself to share your thoughts, your feelings genuinely with the other person. That's the biggest mistake I see.
Interesting. And I think that's something that a trained eye would pick up on, whereas most of the rest of us might not. We just might think we're just not connecting with that person for some reason. We don't know what it is, right? So what do you think that people who are listening right now and who haven't, they're still afraid to step out and maybe do the lives or do some training, and they really have that fear of speaking in front of people? Do you think, what would you say to them? And how do we get through that? Because I think before we jumped on this, we were chatting briefly about, just how important it is to be able to speak and to be able to speak to your audience. It's not just about the written word anymore, but, voice is another, auditory is one of our five senses, right? So when I talk to brand strategists, I'm always like, well, we need to cover as many of the five senses as possible with your brand. And, what you're saying is one thing, but how you're saying it in the voice is how they're hearing your brand. So it's a really, really important part of who you are. And the more levels we can connect on, we've got visually, we've got we probably can't smell each other, but we could sometimes touch things. If you send something out, how does that feel? How does the paper feel? What is it that they're touching? But looking and hearing are probably our two primary senses that we would use for a brand. So most people have got the look down right with what they want to look like visually, but how do they want to sound? And that's probably the biggest thing I see entrepreneurs missing. So for those who haven't yet done it and are like, oh my goodness, that's just so scary, what are the kind of steps that you take to help people start to feel confident in their voice?
Yeah, I totally get that it's scary, because I have to be honest, for me, it was scary when I stepped into the role of an online entrepreneur as well, as a coach, as a teacher. With an acting background, I was so used to being other characters. But stepping up and presenting as myself, I found very confronting. When you're, as I am, an introvert, it can be hard to speak up, to express yourself. And I understand all of that. So I think it comes from a place of understanding what's holding you back and releasing that, so you can really embrace and express the most authentic version of you. It's not about being perfect. It's not about being the loudest in the room. It's not about being the top leading expert in your field. People want to work with you because you're uniquely you, and your voice is uniquely you. Your voice carries a history of everything about you and what makes you unique to somebody else who's teaching the exact same thing. Why is somebody going to want to work with you over somebody else? And that's because of you. So the moment you can open up and share with us who you authentically are, and that comes through the vehicle, which is your voice. That's the moment that you can start to attract a bigger following, attract more customers, more clients, start to see your business scale.
Yes.
Because you've now fully allowed who you are to be shared with the world. And that's a beautiful thing.
And I heard something once that things that have happened in our past can sometimes affect how we speak and present. And so, I think naturally everybody would have inflections in their tone. And, when we get excited, we probably amp up the volume. We might talk a bit faster and be louder. And then at other times we're quieter. But it's interesting because every now and then you do come across some people when they speak who have quite a monotone, like they look like just monotoning it, or they're very quiet. And so are these things that can be fixed? Like, is it still, can we break through that to have a voice that people can really connect with? Because I think naturally when we're listening to someone and they're taking us on a journey with their voice, we're going into, we get that excitement, and then we get the quieter bits, and then we might have a pause, and, it kind of brings us on a journey. Those are the people who we just listen to, and we can't stop listening to what they're saying. Whereas I think, probably everybody's biggest fear is, oh my goodness, but what if I'm the monotone? What if I'm the boring person? What if I'm talking and no one wants to listen to me because when I speak, I'm not exciting? Is this something that you can help people overcome and work through? And is it part of the process?
And, it can be an immediate change. All of that can be shifted from speaking monotone to having more color in your voice, to speaking really fast, to slowing down so people can understand what you're saying. These are tools in our vocal toolkit. Ultimately, for me, it is about creating that connection and taking your audience on a vocal journey so that it is not all one note. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And allowing them to experience that fully and giving yourself permission to take that time. Most of us, that's where we start to get in our head, where we think, oh, how is it affecting the other person? Am I taking up too much airspace? What are they going to think of me? All of these thoughts get in our head and affect the outcome, which is why it's so important to keep it on the other person, to really make it about them and their journey and their transformation. And when we can do that, and make it less about us, that's where they start to get really intrigued and impacted by what we have to share.
Yes. And is there something like if we're hearing or we think we're talking in a monotone, or we watch something that we've recorded and we think, oh, I'm actually really speaking on that level, is there something that might be stopping our voice that we can kind of then become aware of and remove it? Just out of interest, I was thinking maybe it's because we're thinking too much about something else, or maybe we've got a blockage about speaking. We think that we don't have something important to say, or, one of those mindset shifts that potentially could help to release the voice.
Yeah. So that's where our history plays a massive role in how we communicate. And it's looking at where your I call it your voice story began, because it speaks volumes to how we actually communicate today. And so the first step really is about identifying that and building awareness around that, and looking to, well, how do we want to communicate? So if there's certain aspects of your voice that you want to shift, it's identifying that and looking to how we would want to shift that in a different way. But for example, if we bring it back to culture, and we're looking at, I'll use the Australian culture as an example. When I moved here, I heard a lot of upward inflections, which basically means at the end of your thought, the pitch goes up really high. And so it intrigued me so much. I thought, well, where does that come from? Why is that so instilled in this culture? And what I recognized in living here and observing that and trying to dissect what that meant, I looked at the conversation and the communication between one person and the other person. And what I noticed is it was about checking in with your audience, noticing if they were with you, making sure that it was okay if you continue to speak, very polite. So there was this real interesting back and forth of communication that was happening here. And I thought, gosh, that's a bit different to where I just came from in the US. And that really fascinated me. So whenever I hear those upward inflections in the Australian accent, I'm noticing the behavior as well that's attached to that. Is in acting, we call it subtext. You might be saying one thing, but you're feeling a totally different way. And so those upward inflections are giving us cues into your internal thought pattern. And so if we shift those inflections, it can also shift our internal thought pattern. So the two go hand in hand. How you think affects how you speak. And so if you want to shift how you speak, for example, an upward inflection, we have to start with shifting how we think.
And so this would be like preparing before you go on camera, before you start speaking, to actually get yourself in the right energy, in the right sort of space, to be relaxed, probably do a bit of breathing. I know that you definitely helped me with how to breathe a bit better, and I know that I'm probably not doing it right all of the time. But I certainly have started to, before I record on the podcast or do my intros, I kind of sit for a moment, I relax, I smile, I turn on the positive energy, and just the thought about how happy I am to be doing this podcast and to be bringing this information to somebody, and that it might help them, and just really tuning into that as my emotion, rather than worrying too much about what I'm going to say and the words, and if people are going to like it or not. I'm like, of course someone's not going to like it. I'm not here for everybody. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay. I'm more thinking, about the people who I am speaking to, and the ones who, people have told me they're listening to every episode, and that just makes me think that's amazing. I'm so grateful. And I think tuning into that for me something I'm trying to do. So I hope that that's coming through in my voice and how I'm delivering. But is that those sort of exercises? So do you have some, like an example of one that you might do for somebody who hasn't done this before? Like what kind of things they could do to prepare their voice before they speak?
Well, there's a variety of different exercises you can do, and it's about finding the exercises that really work with you. Some exercises might work with you that don't really resonate with somebody else, but I look for the most effective ones that I think will help everyone from, I work with all sorts of people, from actors to broadcast journalists to entrepreneurs of all different sorts. And it always starts, for me, it starts with the mind. How we think affects how we speak. And I have a little go-to phrase that I love to use. It's called, I have something to say. And so anytime you're feeling insecure about using your voice, hesitant about speaking up, whatever you're going to say, you're going to do a couple of steps. First, you're verbally going to say, I have something to say. And then you're going to say whatever you're going to say. Then you're going to go back. You're going to think, I have something to say. Breathe. And then again, say whatever it is you're going to say. So we can try it now. Jess, what's something you want to say?
What is something that I want to say? Putting me on the spot. Let's think.
How do you usually introduce your podcasts, for example?
How do I usually introduce? Yeah, I think about what is the most important thing that I want someone to take away from this episode. So I would think about the fact that voice is the most underutilized and under-recognized part of your brand. So I'd come up with that would be my thing that I want to get across.
Okay. All right. So give yourself a moment to think about what you would say, one sentence. And then before you start, I want you to breathe, say verbally, I have something to say, and then jump straight into that sentence.
Okay. I have something to say. Did you know that voice is one of the most underutilized parts of your brand that every entrepreneur should know, understand, and be using to communicate with their global audience?
Okay, cool. Now, this time I want you to do the same exercise. You're going to think instead of speak, I have something to say. And when you breathe, allow yourself to breathe. And instead of breathing out before you start speaking, let that breath come out in the words.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Whenever you're ready.
Did you know that voice is the most underutilized part of your brand that most entrepreneurs are missing when they're thinking about how they're going to communicate with their global audience?
Okay, cool. That's almost like two sentences. So let's try it one last time.
And I made it up on the spot, so I didn't do it the same time.
Or what if we just do that first bit? Did you know that voice is whatever you said, part of your brand?
Yeah.
Part of your brand. Full stop. We'll use that. Okay. So you're going to think, I have something to say. Breathe. Did you know? Jump straight into it. And really tell me, because I'm here with you. So I want you to connect with me.
Connect with you. Okay.
Yeah.
I was inside my head that last time, I'll be honest. Thinking about what I was saying. Okay. Did you know that voice is the most important part of creating a really authentic brand?
Good. Now this time, just let it go and just connect to me and just tell me.
Did you know that voice is the most important part of creating a really authentic brand?
Nice. How did that last one feel?
Good. Except I breathed in the middle of it. I was a little conscious of not using my breath the whole way through. But yeah, it felt more relaxed. I was a little bit more relaxed that last time.
And that's the key. is to feel relaxed when we're speaking. When we start to tense up, we can actually hear it in our voice. We can hear that tension, and we can also see it too if you're on camera. So we need to allow ourselves to speak from a place of relaxation. That doesn't mean floppy and like you're going to fall asleep, like you're that, but we're active, we're present in our body, which means free of tension. And when we can speak from that nice, calm state, that's where we can really attract and connect to the other person. And it becomes highly interesting for the listener, for the receiving end.
Yeah. And do you know the feeling change for me in hearing you say and using that sentence, I have something to say? It suddenly took it from, what do I need to say? I have got to say something for my business, to actually feeling like I am an authority. I've got something to say, and I've got something important to say, and I'm going to deliver it, whether it's one person listening or 10 or 100 or 1,000. Just those words, naturally putting them in my mind and thinking them and saying them, it made me feel a lot more authoritative. And I've got that confidence in, I'm going to say something that people want to hear, and I'm going to deliver it and feel much more comfortable delivering it than when I was just focusing on what it was that I wanted to say. So I think I like that little set of like, I have something to say. Okay, now I'm going to say it.
That's it. That's exactly it. It's owning our voice and feeling that you start to feel confident with your voice, with your message, that your message is powerful, that it's impactful, and people want to receive it. And we stop putting the worry and the fear and the judgment on us of what are people going to think about who I am, how I'm speaking, how I look, all these things that, to be honest, we don't really care about.
Yeah.
As the person speaking, we allow that to get in the way, but the person listening doesn't care about that. They care about them. They care about results. They care about the transformation. So the more you can get out of your own way and just really own what you're saying, and that's a very simple exercise that everyone can try, you will start to feel more confident and start to open up and get excited to share your message with the listener, with the other person on the receiving end. And that's where you start to feel that magnetic connection.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so important for us all to remember that we're not saying it for everybody. We're not saying it for the person who might be the expert in the area. You're saying it for the person that needs your help, the person who doesn't know what you know, that the person who's listening and thinking, this is exactly what I needed to hear today, and it's helping me. And I think we focus so much on, how am I going to be criticized? Or, someone who's an expert might think that I've said it wrong, or I'm saying the wrong thing. And all of that fear, it can really stop us from taking that step to feeling like we do have something to say that's of value and getting out there and doing it. But just having that one simple sentence, I love that one. I might stick it on my wall. I have something to say. I'm saying it for the people who need to hear that today, the people who it's there for. It's not for everybody else. And I don't even need to worry about them. Don't need to bother about what they're thinking because it's not being delivered for them.
Yeah. And that's really it. When you can speak to one, you can speak to many. And it's about lasering it down to one specific person. When you start to broaden out and imagine that you're speaking to a giant audience, I think that's where you start to get a bit lost and self-conscious. Yes. You got to bring it down to speaking to that one person. And that's where it starts to feel like a conversation.
Yeah. It's so true. And, it's funny because it's exactly what I talk to my clients about, because obviously I help them with really defining their niche and their ideal customer, because while, my marketing is my background, but I know from 23 years of doing marketing that it's all about knowing exactly who you're speaking to. And when you do that, it's so much easier. Like you're saying with voice, when we're just imagining one person, you're feeling where they are. You're understanding what's frustrating them right now, where they're at, what they're thinking, and what they might be doing or believing that's actually not helping them or not true potentially as well. You can speak so much more specifically and directly to them when you've got them in your mind than when you're thinking, oh, but I better not say that because that might not be relevant for those ones. So I'll say this. And inside your head as you're talking, if you're actually imagining a bigger group of people in a broader audience, you're hip hopping between all these different people thinking, I've got to say something that will make sense for them. And now I'll add on another piece. And you're probably off on tangents and you're tic-tacking. And that's not going to be a great delivery. So like you said, having that one person that you're speaking to today, even if your audience has multiple people in it, I think with each delivery, it's like, who is this mostly for? I'm going to speak on this topic today. Who most needs to hear it and why? Why do they need to hear it? What is it that I need to say that's going to help that person? Because that will be your strongest delivery. You'll really get into that place of saying something that matters. And the other people in your audience, yes, it may help them as well. It'll definitely resonate, but it'll resonate the strongest when you've been able to get specific with the person who you're really talking to.
Yeah. And even then, when you were just talking about that, you started to open up and we could feel an emotional connection to you actually speaking to another person, your passion behind that, which is really nice. And that's what we want. We want to be moved. We want to feel. It's that feeling that you evoke that gets us to take that next step, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it comes into, because we're talking about business here and being business owners. And, I think that's the other interesting thing with a lot of women I work with. We come from backgrounds, we've done so many different things. When we're looking at what our niche is and who we help, it's often hard because you think, well, there's so many different things I can offer and do. I've got all these skills and I've got all this experience and it's quite broad. But when you can sort of step inside and uncover what your passion is, what your real, what you've got to bring to other people that you love to talk about, you can't stop talking about, you smile when you talk about it, maybe even have the thoughts running through your head when you're in the shower and all of that going on. That's your thing. Yeah, yes, you can do other things. You can always find something to sell. You can make a service about anything if you want to, but that's not your thing unless it's in your core. And when you're talking about it, it's like you've lifted the lid off the toy box or opened a present, and it's that joy, that energy is there because this is your thing. And that's what you help people with most. So I love this, how it's kind of dovetailing together a bit of what you do and what I do. But I think it's when you find your niche and your ideal customer, then, your voice of authority, you've actually got the building blocks of it. And then it's about learning how to let it out and communicate it and all of the amazing stuff that you help people with actually how to speak and get those words out. And it'll be easier for you because you've got the great building blocks there as well.
Definitely.
That's what you want to say. Wow. I love that. That's such a great connection there.
It makes sense, doesn't it? It's like we all look at branding, what is our brand? And this is just identifying your voice brand. How does your voice communicate with others who you are and who you serve? And so if you're putting all this attention to your brand, you better make sure that you're putting some attention to your voice brand as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like having I'm just making all this up on the spot. My metaphor is it's like banana cake with no icing on the top. You want cream cheese with the carrot cake. Your voice is such an integral part of it because it's adding it together to be that beautiful package of your brand, and it is what makes it authentic. No one else can be you. No one else is going to sound like you. They're not going to use the same words as you. Anyone can go and choose colors and have designs and logos. That is not your brand. You're your brand. And it's so important to let it shine out and let it connect with people. That's how you attract your people, your clients, your audience to you. So that's amazing. So Katherine, I know that you've shared with us some amazing tips today and really great insights into why voice is so important, but you do help people to go through the steps of actually uncovering your voice story. What is it in your past that might be affecting how you speak today, and how you can become a confident speaker, but also an authentic speaker who can connect.
Yeah, for sure. So there's different avenues to work with me. You can look me up on the Instagram, which is at Katherine_Beck_.
Awesome. And I will link all of those social profiles and your website links in the show notes as well. So if you didn't get that down, then just click through and you can head to it from the show notes. Thank you so much, Katherine. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with today? Any final thought about your voice, a message that you'd like to share?
I would say that we were all born with a voice, and over time, our voice has been shaped and molded by our experiences, which is a beautiful thing. And we have to keep remembering that our voice is unique to us, and there's a reason why we do what we do. And the more you can share your true voice with your audience, with the world, the greater the world would be, because we really need people who are thoughtfully and genuinely making a difference in the world. And I believe the greatest way to make that difference is through your voice.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. That's amazing. Thanks so much for joining today, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
So if you would like to improve the marketing of your business, then the first place we always start is with your ideal customer avatar. Now, my system for your ideal client is different to most. With my ultimate customer avatar worksheet, there are 35 questions to help you really deep dive into what your ideal client is currently thinking, feeling, and what their goals are, what they're doing in their buying behavior. Go to jessicaosborne.com/customer-avatar to download your free copy of my ultimate customer avatar worksheet today. And let's get started on defining who that ideal client really is.